The news hit me like a bolt of lightning on a sunny day. I was folding laundry when the phone rang, and the trembling voice of the officer on the line made my heart freeze. His words barely registered as he explained there had been an accident. My husband, Adam, was gone. A sudden horrific car crash had taken him from us. It felt unreal, like a cruel prank I couldn't escape. In the weeks that followed, I drifted through life in a fog, every step weighed down by the overwhelming sorrow. My 17-year-old son, Alex, became my only reason to get out of bed each morning. He was the spitting image of his father, the same sandy hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to capture the world in their depths. The grief in his gaze mirrored my own, and it shattered me to see him trying to stay strong for my sake when he was clearly struggling to keep himself together. The day of the funeral was bright and clear, as if the world hadn't been informed of our heartbreak. I stood by the grave, gripping Alex's hand like a lifeline. He didn't cry. He hadn't shed a tear since the night we received the news. He just stood there, silent and resolute, his jaw tight as he stared at the casket, as if willing Adam to rise and tell us it was all a terrible mistake. When everyone else had left, I stayed behind, kneeling by the grave and whispering the words I wished I'd said when Adam was still alive. I couldn't wrap my mind around it, how he could be gone so suddenly, and how we were supposed to move forward without him. Alex stood a few steps away, his back to me, gazing at the rows of headstones, lost in his own pain. It was then I noticed how isolated he seemed, and guilt crept in for being so consumed by my own grief that I hadn't seen his. The house felt different after that day, emptier, as though Adam's absence had left a hollow space. His shoes still sat by the door, and his jacket hung on the hallway hook. I couldn't bear to move them, as if leaving them there would somehow keep a part of him with us. Alex withdrew into himself, spending most of his time locked in his room or staying out late, refusing to talk about his father, or anything really. It was as if he'd built a wall around himself and I was too fragile to break through it. One night, a few weeks after the funeral, I heard a noise downstairs. It was late, well past midnight. Wrapping a robe around myself, I made my way to the kitchen. There, I found Alex sitting at the table, his head buried in his hands. The sight of him broke my heart all over again. "Alex," I said softly as I stepped into the room. He didn't look up, but I could see his shoulders trembling. Without hesitation, I went to him and wrapped my arms around his shaking frame. He crumpled against me, the dam finally bursting as a raw, guttural sob tore through him. It was the first time I'd seen him cry since it happened. I held him tightly as he poured out every ounce of grief onto my shoulder. "I can't do this," he choked out between sobs. "I can't live without him." His words cut through me like a blade, echoing the very fears I had been harboring. I wanted to tell him we'd get through it together, but the truth was I wasn't sure we would. I had no answers for him, no way to make it better. All I could do was hold him and cry with him, sharing the unbearable pain that had become our reality. After that night, something shifted between us. It was as if breaking down together had torn down the wall he'd built, replacing it with a fragile, unspoken understanding. We began spending more time together, eating dinner at the table instead of separately, watching TV in the evenings. It wasn't the same as before, but it was a start. A few months later, I found Alex on the couch, flipping through an old photo album. The pages were filled with pictures of Adam, his playful grin, the way he'd ruffle Alex's hair, the joy on his face as he held Alex as a baby. I sat down beside him and he didn't pull away. "He was a good dad," Alex said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "The best," I agreed, placing a hand on his shoulder. We sat in silence for a long time, lost in our memories. It felt like a moment of healing, small but meaningful, a sliver of light breaking through the darkness that had surrounded us since Adam's death. I realized then that we were both holding on to him in our own ways, afraid that letting go would mean losing him completely. As the months went by, we began to find a new rhythm, one that was ours, though it felt incomplete. Alex started to open up more, sharing memories of his father and laughing at the jokes Adam used to tell. We still cried sometimes, but we also found moments of joy, small but real. The pain of losing Adam never disappeared, but it became a part of us, woven into the fabric of our lives. We learned to carry it with us, letting it serve as a reminder of how deeply we had loved and how profoundly we had been loved in return. One evening, as we sat together in the backyard watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alex turned to me and asked, "We're going to be okay, right, Mom?" I looked at him, the young man he had become, and saw so much of Adam in his eyes. It was a bittersweet comfort, but it was enough. "Yes," I said, squeezing his hand. "We're going to be okay." For the first time, I believed it. As the months passed, the sharp, gut-wrenching agony of grief softened into a quieter, more persistent sadness. It wasn't the unbearable pain it had been at first. Instead, it became a constant ache, like an old wound that flares up on cold days. Alex threw himself into his schoolwork. It was his senior year, and despite everything, he was determined to get into a great college, just as Adam had always encouraged him to. I could see how hard he was pushing himself, using his studies as a way to distract from the pain. I worried about him and the weight he carried, but I also understood that this was his way of coping. He needed something to ground him, a purpose to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner table, Alex walked into the kitchen. He had that familiar look on his face, a mix of hesitation and the need to talk about something significant. "Mom," he began, pausing as though unsure of how to proceed. I set the dish I was holding down and turned to face him, giving him my full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his messy hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Adam that it made my heart ache. "I've been thinking about college," he said. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I got an acceptance letter today," he added quietly, pulling a crumpled envelope from his pocket and holding it out to me. I took it and immediately recognized the logo of the university Adam had attended. His dream school. Pride surged through me, mingled with a deep pang of sadness. "Oh, Alex, that's amazing," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He looked at me, searching my face for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know if I should go," he admitted. "It feels wrong, like I'd be leaving you behind." His words hit me hard. I had seen this coming, that unspoken fear that he was the only thing holding me together and that leaving would mean abandoning me. But it wasn't true, not really. Yes, I had been struggling, but more than anything, I wanted him to live his life fully, to chase his dreams as Adam would have wanted. I stepped closer, placing my hands on his shoulders. "Alex," I said gently, "you are not responsible for me. I know it feels that way right now, but I promise you, I'll be okay. You need to do this for yourself, not for me." He looked down, biting his lip. "But what if you need me? What if it's too much for you without me here?" he asked softly. I pulled him into a tight hug, holding him close as I whispered, "You've given me more strength than you realize. But your life is just beginning, and I need you to live it for both of us." His arms tightened around me. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice small and vulnerable, like a child's. "Me too," I replied honestly. "But we'll get through this. We always do." Our evenings together gradually became the part of the day I looked forward to most. I knew Alex was trying to be there for me, sensing how much I was struggling, but I also noticed subtle changes in him. His actions, his expressions, even small gestures that had once felt ordinary, began to carry a different weight. One evening we were sitting on the couch watching an old movie. Alex draped his arm around my shoulders like he had when he was little. His hand was warm, and I noticed a slight tremor in it. When I turned to ask if he was okay, he caught my gaze. There was something different in his eyes, a look I couldn't quite place. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. He nodded but didn't break eye contact, as if trying to convey something he couldn't say aloud. "I'm just really grateful for you," he said finally, offering a small, hesitant smile. His hand slid from my shoulder, leaving a lingering warmth behind. "I'm grateful for you too," I replied, attempting to look away but feeling an unexplainable tension in the air. It was a fleeting moment, but there was something in it, something more than simple gratitude from a son to his mother. The next morning I woke early and went to the kitchen. Alex was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. When I walked in, he looked up and held my gaze longer than usual. There was something in his expression that felt off, something that didn't seem appropriate. It was as though he was trying to work through something important. "Mom," he began as I poured myself coffee and sat down next to him. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You know how much I love you, right?" "Of course I do," I answered with a smile, though my heartbeat quickened slightly. "It's not just love, Mom," he said, leaning in closer. "I feel something more and I don't know what to do about it." I froze, not fully understanding what he meant at first. His eyes were filled with emotions I had never seen before. It wasn't the gaze of a son seeking solace from his mother. It was the look of a man yearning for something more. "Alex," I whispered, struggling to make sense of what I was feeling. "This isn't right. You know that. He glanced away briefly before locking eyes with me again. I know, he admitted, but I can't stop it. After Dad died, when it was just the two of us, something changed. I see you differently now, and I can't pretend otherwise. My heart raced, pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it. I didn't know how to respond because deep down, the part of me that felt lost and isolated since Adam's death couldn't fully reject what he was saying. But I knew it was wrong. We're just confused, I said, desperate to inject logic into what was happening. This pain, this loneliness, it's making us reach for comfort in each other because we miss him so much. It's not just that, Alex insisted, his voice steadier now. I feel like I've always seen you differently. I just didn't realize it until now. His words left me speechless. I pushed back my chair and stood, needing space to think, to breathe. Alex, we can't keep talking about this, I said, turning to face the window, unwilling to meet his eyes. Why not? He asked, stepping closer but stopping a few feet away. We're alone, Mom. Maybe it's wrong, but it's the truth. We feel something and it's real. His words weighed on me like an anchor. When I finally turned back to him, I saw the pain, the confusion, but also something deeper, something I was terrified to acknowledge. You're my son, I said, my voice breaking. I'll always love you, but we can't let this change who we are. We can't cross that line. Alex took a step back, his shoulders slumping as though he'd lost a fight he never stood a chance of winning. I didn't mean to scare you, he whispered, his gaze falling to the floor. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore. I approached him, resting a hand on his shoulder and gently lifting his chin so he'd look at me. We're going through something incredibly difficult, I said softly. I understand what you're feeling, because I'm confused too. But we'll find another way through this. Together, as a family. He nodded, though his eyes brimmed with unshed tears. As a family, he repeated. But there was a sadness in his tone, as if the words no longer held the meaning they once did. In the days that followed, a thick tension hung between us, an invisible wall we couldn't seem to break down. We moved through the house carefully, avoiding accidental touches in the hallway and avoiding each other's eyes at dinner. It felt like a thread had been pulled from the fabric of our bond, unraveling everything we thought we knew about each other. One evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, I felt Alex's presence behind me before he spoke. He had a way of appearing quietly, as if trying to gather the courage to say something but constantly second-guessing himself. Turning to face him, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and forced a smile. Is everything okay? I asked, keeping my voice light, even though I knew it wasn't. He nodded, but his eyes betrayed him. It was that same look he had given me a few nights before, the one that made my pulse race and left me feeling unsteady. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the other night, he said, his voice low. I shouldn't have said what I did. Relief washed over me, though it was quickly replaced by an ache I didn't want to name. You don't have to apologize, I said, stepping closer and placing a hand on his arm. We're both grieving, both feeling lost. It's natural to look for comfort, even if it doesn't always come out the way we expect. He didn't pull away from my touch. Instead, he placed his hand over mine, holding it there as though it were his anchor. I know, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. But it's more than that for me. I can't lie about it, even if it would be easier. The honesty in his words shook me, and I felt a tremor run through my body. I wanted to say something that would make everything go back to normal, to restore the boundaries we had always maintained, but nothing came to mind. We stood there, the silence pressing heavily around us, our hands intertwined in a way that no longer felt innocent. Alex, we can't, I started, but my voice faltered as he stepped closer. I know we can't, he said, his breath warm against my cheek as he leaned in, so close I could feel the heat radiating from him. But that doesn't stop me from wanting it. His confession shattered something inside me. I pulled my hand from his grasp, stepping back as though burned. My back hit the kitchen counter, and I gripped the edge for support. You're my son, I whispered, tears spilling over. We can't do this. We can't feel this way. He looked at me, his face open and vulnerable with a rawness that left me breathless. I don't want to feel this way, he said, his voice breaking, but I can't stop it. When I see you, all I want is to be close to you, to make you feel loved the way Dad did. It's like something inside me shifted, and I don't know how to undo it. His words lingered between us, a desperate confession that tore at the last shreds of my composure. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth, shaking my head. This isn't love, Alex, I said softly. It's grief. It's loneliness. We're trying to fill a void that can't be filled this way. He stepped back, wiping at his damp eyes. Maybe you're right, he replied quietly, but it feels real, and I don't know how to make it go away. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground beneath me crumbling with every word. I had to be strong, for both of us, even though inside I was consumed by confusion and a forbidden, unspoken yearning. We need time, I said at last, my voice rough with emotion. Time to heal, time to make sense of what we're feeling. But we can't keep going on like this, Alex. It's not fair, to either of us. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor, shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll try, he murmured, but I can't promise it'll be easy. Neither can I admitted. Every instinct told me to reach out, to pull him into my arms as I had when he was a child, when a hug could fix anything. But I knew that if I touched him now, it wouldn't be the same. It couldn't be. The days that followed were quiet, heavy with unspoken words. We fell into a pattern of avoidance, speaking only when necessary. Our conversations were stilted, our interactions tense and awkward. I saw the pain in Alex's eyes each time he looked at me, a reflection of the ache I carried in my own heart. It felt as though we were both mourning not just Adam's death, but also the loss of something undefined, something neither of us had truly had, but had fleetingly wished for. One evening, I found Alex sitting on the back porch, staring out at the fading colors of the sunset. I paused in the doorway, watching him for a moment before stepping outside. He didn't acknowledge me as I sat beside him, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. I've been thinking, he said after a long silence, his voice barely audible. Maybe it's better if I leave for college sooner than I planned. I think we both need space, time to figure things out. The thought of him leaving so soon twisted something deep in my chest, but I knew he was right. Staying here, in this house, with everything that had happened between us, was only making it harder. Maybe you're right, I said softly. Maybe a fresh start is what we both need. He turned to look at me then, his eyes filled with a sorrow that pierced straight through me. I love you, Mom, he said, his voice raw with emotion. In ways I shouldn't. In ways I don't know how to control. But I'll try to let it go. For you, for us. I reached out, taking his hand in mine and squeezing it tightly. I love you too, I whispered, my voice trembling. And I know we'll get through this. It just might take time. He nodded, blinking back tears. For a fleeting moment, it felt like we were finally on the same page, beginning to understand each other in a way untangled from grief and confusion. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the yard, I held his hand a little longer than I should have, memorizing its warmth and the feel of his touch. It was a kind of goodbye. Not forever, but for this part of us, the part we both knew had to be left behind.